Good morning, everyone. We're going to kick things off now. Thank you for coming this, what seems like an ungodly early hour of a Saturday morning on the last day or the second last day of the festival. We're going to talk about a kind of fairly important kind of background subject in the world of journalism, which is technology, and specifically what Elon Musk has been doing with technology as it affects the news media. So at this festival, we've already seen quite a few panels and discussions that talk about this, and specifically about Elon Musk. I think we had one panel that was actually called The Muskification of American Media. And we've heard a lot of terms, including in panel titles like emperors, and I think I've heard overlords. I'm going to just try to sum up what I've taken away from these panels, the few that I've watched, that kind of captures, I think, the tenor of them. And there's a quote here that I think does that, and the quote is, "Let's be clear, we now have a techno-fascist regime." So in this panel, we're going to do something a little different. So we're not going to not going to take that approach. We're going to try to take the ideas that Elon Musk has about the future of news seriously, and we're going to try to consider them kind of on their merits, and we're going to try to stay away from kind of like the name calling, the kind of impassioned side of that, because those really are not effective critiques of what's happening, and we're going to try to have that little bit of perspective. I'm not going to do introductions here of the panelists. I'll just name them. We have Murielle Popa-Fabre, we have Shuwei Fang, and we have Paul Matzko. Their bios, you'll see from their bios in the program or on the website if you're looking at it online. They're very, very qualified to talk about these subjects, but in the interest of time, I won't introduce them. But what I'll do is before we kick off the discussion, I'll just start with a very kind of quick, brief overview of Elon Musk's activities in media, just to kind of set the scene. So just bear with me for 5 minutes. I'm going to do this mostly in the form of his tweets. So he starts his engagement with the news world back in 1995. His first company is called Zip2, and that was his first fortune. He sold Zip2, and that was his first fortune, and then he doubled down on that and did the PayPal thing and doubled down on that and went to SpaceX and Tesla, and the rest is history. But that was essentially a searchable yellow pages with maps and everything for news publishers. His clients were news publishers in 1995. But of course, it's Twitter that he's most, where his relevance in media is most pronounced. And so he starts his Twitter account around 2010. And at the moment, he's just shy of about 220 million followers, which is a substantial proportion of the population of the planet, really. And he tweets at an insanely ferocious pace. There's been studies of this from the Wall Street Journal and The Guardian and others. There are days when he's up around 100 tweets a day, which personally, I don't understand how a grown man with a job can tweet 100 tweets a day, but he seems to manage it quite well. And so I'm going to use those tweets to try to, I'm going to use just about a dozen of those tweets to try to convey his history with news through this period. So I'm going to start with a tweet from December 2015, and that's announcing the formation of OpenAI. He was one of the founders of OpenAI in December 2015. Here's another tweet from May 2018, and this gets more specific to his critique of mainstream news media. The tweet is, "Going to create a site where the public can rate the core truth of any article and track the credibility score over time of each journalist, editor, and publication, thinking of calling it Pravda." That was 2018. Here's a tweet from 2021, and this is in response to a comment or question about how internet regulation and how content regulation might work in an environment where people are getting their internet from Starlink, from his satellite communication constellation. And his tweet in response to that in 2021 was, "They can shake their fist at the sky." Right? That's his response to a question about regulation. And just as an addendum there, the first direct-to-cell phone Starlink service started operating about a year ago. Fourth tweet, this is October 2022, "Entering Twitter HQ, let that sink in." That was accompanied by this photograph of him carrying a sink, an actual sink into the building. He buys Twitter at that time. He does some interesting things. He open sources the ranking algorithm. He converts Birdwatch into community notes. He rebrands to X in the summer of 2023. Another tweet here from March 2023 is maximum truth-seeking is my best guess for AI safety. So if you remember, that first half of 2023 was very much concerned with AI safety. People were signing, petitions for moratoriums, all that kind of stuff. And his best guess was maximally truth-seeking, he claimed. April 2023, here's a tweet. Twitter is a serious danger to their ability to control the narrative. By they, he means mainstream media. But he's very focused on the agenda setting, the control of narrative. That's 2023. July 2023, announcing the formation of XAI to understand reality, right? So he founds OpenAI, or part of the founding team of OpenAI in December 2016, and then he leaves in between, but then starts this X.AI to understand reality. There's a whole bunch of other tweets there. He's very influenced by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and some of the ideas in there, in that book, but that's when XAI comes along. He builds this training center in Memphis called Colossus in 9 months, launches Grok 1, the language model, in November 2023, and then Grok 3 just launched earlier this year, which is a kind of a leading edge GPT 4.0 kind of tier model. Another tweet from October 2023 is citizen journalism is the path to a better future, exclamation mark. And so this is his interpretation of citizen journalism, is people writing things on X, on Twitter. A tweet from March 2024, AI will probably be smarter than any single human next year, that's this year, and by 2029, AI will probably be smarter than all humans combined. So he really buys into that whole sort of HEI, superintelligence kind of thing. Moving into 2025, January 2025, you are the media now. So this is after his dramatic influence in the presidential election in the US and the role that alternative media had in that. You are the media now. And then looking a little bit to the future, this is also January 2025, and this is a little specific. Our goal is to and this is about his intentions for X. Our goal is to maximize unregretted user seconds. Too much negativity is being pushed that technically grows user time, but not unregretted user time. And believe me, a lot of my time on X is regretted. And there's a follow-up tweet here, which is, we are also working on easy ways for you to adjust the content feed dynamically so that you can have what you want at any given moment. And this is an idea that is very much in the mix right now, that we will use language models to control the ranking algorithms that deliver us content. We will have personal editors through these AI tools that we communicate with constantly to get them to adjust their algorithms. Spotify AI playlist is like this. And then lastly, from March 2025, about a week or so ago, XAI has acquired X in an all-stock transaction. So these are one entity. This is an AI social network kind of combination. Just lastly, there's another tweet or another set of statements here. This is from an email that Elon Musk sent to Alex Kantrowitz, who is he's a journalist. He runs the Big Technology podcast. And he had this interaction by email with Elon Musk that he published, and this is around a product that X has called X Stories. The idea is to use AI to blend breaking news and commentary, building real-time summaries of events. Then you can go deeper via chat on Grok. Grok's the language model. As more information becomes available, the news summary will update to include that information. Grok is analyzing sometimes tens of thousands of X posts to render a news summary. The goal is simple, to provide maximally accurate and timely information citing the most significant sources. So that, I think, gives like a brief overview of kind of, how he, and there's a lot more obviously going on besides that, but a very brief overview of kind of how he's personally thinking about the intersection of AI and media. So I'm going to start with some opening questions for the panel here. And these are just some brief kind of scene-setting questions. And I'll start, Paul, with you at the other end, if that's okay. Just on AI itself, how important is this moment that we're in with AI? Is it social media level important? Is it internet level important? Is it Printing press level important, language level important, writing level important? Like, how important is it?
That's great, David. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually reminded the Musk shake your fist at the sky to the regulators. It puts me in mind of the 1920s radio evangelist Amy Semple McPherson, who sent a telegram, probably apocryphal, but sent a telegram to Herbert Hoover, who was then Commerce Secretary and had regulatory oversight over the radio, saying, please order your minions of Satan to keep their hands off my radio station, right? So there's a certain defiant attitude that was true a century ago with a different information medium. So I'm a historian of mass media, and one thing that's common across information revolutions and new technologies that allow interconnection, new forms of interconnection, is that they're all pushing back against the very basic human frailty or human flaw, which is that knowledge, information, expertise, and insight are widely distributed, right? So every one of the 8 billion people have pieces of useful information and even newsworthy information that would benefit the other 7.9 odd billion. Whether that's the right time to leave my house on Nottingham Way to avoid the traffic at 5 Points to get to the Trenton Transit Center, take a train to JFK Airport, to fly to Rome, to end up at Perugia, or if it's the current price of goats in a market village in Sudan. That information, insight, and expertise is widely distributed. But there's a problem, and the problem is what Hayek called the knowledge problem, is that the ability to process, collate, and distribute that information is centralized, whether that's the government, corporations, or even newsrooms. And there's informational deadweight loss between the two. Now, the good news is that new technologies decrease the amount of informational deadweight loss. Less stuff just goes off into the ether. And that propels those network effects, informational network effects, propel innovation, progress, economic growth, and so on. But what makes AI, I think, fundamentally different than things like the printing press, the invention of writing, literacy, and so on, is that many of these new information technologies affect the distribution. They reduce information loss on the distribution side. AI affects both distribution through better algorithmic discovery, but also information and knowledge production. And so that makes it kind of fundamentally different from these historical predecessors.
And Shuwei, what's your perspective on the importance of AI?
So I guess to just expand on Paul's point a little bit, taking news media as a sort of business process that covers the 3 core functions of production, distribution, and consumption, I think really with the invention of writing, the printing press, and social media, what we have seen are paradigm shifts in a little bit in the production function and very much so in the distribution function. If you look at the history of news from the 1800s to today, it's more or less the same thing, right? We still have news in containers, articles which are relatively a steady state and are permanent. We mostly still assume that the consumer is passive. What the presence of powerful AI has enabled are paradigm shifts in all 3 of these functions: production, distribution, and consumption at the same time. And I think it's the combination of these 3 together that means that there'll be a different and non-linear experience to the step changes that you've described.
And Murielle?
Yeah, it's a question, though. My remark is in line with the first 2 ones. I would say it's an at-scale moment. So you're writing, so you have information from that person without that person. You're printing, you have a diffusion amplification. You have internet, you start pushing further the diffusion, and you have a not centralized way of gathering information. And then all these can happen at scale and in a multimodal way with AI. And I would always refrain to have historical analogies, because from a methodological point of view, they just think it's as if the solution was in the past and we have to recycle it. And I think it's important to use them for what they're useful for, but in order really to see what is there to be seen and to take the responsibility to do it, because somehow what is happening is that humans are more and more outside the loop of information, right? Writing, people are not there, you read, and so on and so forth. So we're trying to have this kind of human-in-the-loop thing of AI, and we are in a situation where things happen both at scale and in a multimodal way. So that's my definition.
And like turning to Elon Musk himself, so Shuwei, how serious are his ideas about the future of news? Like, is he a serious, serious character around the future of news, and how seriously should we take his ideas?
I think that Musk should absolutely be taken as a serious businessman who has successfully transformed and created value in two separate industries and has now entered the competitive environment for information. So Musk's previous business approaches have been well documented in SpaceX and Tesla. There's a legacy industry with newly available technology that somehow manages to provide some leverage. He then assembles a high-functioning team around that and builds a theoretical model using a first principles approach, which is an approach used in STEM quite a lot, which essentially strips away all assumptions from the legacy business model and then asks the question repeatedly, what is the core problem we're trying to solve and why? So he's done this, and sort of Tesla and SpaceX work and provide additional value. By contrast, a lot of the focus in the news media industry in the last 2 years or so since powerful AI made an appearance has been largely around efficiency, so leveraging the existing the newly available technology and applying it to the existing business models, which is obviously completely necessary, but at the same time, the ease of application of this technology doesn't ensure a long-term competitive edge, nor does it ensure newly created value or IP. If everyone's able to do it, they eventually will. So from an investment perspective, it's a lot like the innovator's dilemma. New technology is available. In order to leverage those gains, you need to completely transform your business model, but doing so actually puts your legacy business model at direct competition. So there's obviously a huge disincentive to do so. At the same time, within the sort of news media industry, the incentives are really pressures towards driving efficiency. There's 9 different AI journalism accelerators out there to apply the technology to existing workflows. This is completely necessary. Dave and I ran one in 2023. But again, by contrast, if we look at the competitive environment, there is someone out there who is stripping away all the assumptions and saying, can we rebuild this model better, taking a sort of user-centric approach? What will actually drive value for users? What assumptions can we get rid of? What can we do radically different? I would go a little bit further and say not only should Elon Musk be taken seriously as a competitor in this environment, but news media might be tempted or should be asking the question themselves, what can we do from a first principles approach?
And I think that first principles term, listening to him talk about his approach to these businesses, this idea of first principles, and he contrasts it with first principles thinking versus thinking by analogy. And just to kind of maybe paraphrase what you're saying there, and this corresponds with my own personal experience, the news industry is doing a lot of thinking by analogy right now around the use of AI, and the first principles, we may be more in a first principles moment because of the severity of this technology, and if Silicon Valley recognizes that, and the news industry doesn't, then there's an asymmetry there. Murielle, how do you feel about Elon Musk's seriousness as a visionary for news?
I also think he's a serial entrepreneur, and definitely this idea of taking the whole value chain as a block is winning, right? SpaceX, but let's focus on Neuralink, for example. They started 1.5 years ago to build robots to implant the chips. But why did they do that? Because they realized there wouldn't have been enough surgeons in order to implant the chip in patients' brains. So you take the surgeon, which is a necessary end of a value chain, and you automatize and you make it a robot. So the question for media and journalism is to what extent social media are the value chain inside the endpoint of the value chain of information, and to what extent this automatization equates to the surgeon automatization. So,
well, just to carry on that point, he's obviously got this vision for journalism, in which journalists play a much reduced role, if a role at all. replaced by some combination of crowdsourced information and AI. So and this is a model of journalism that Shuwei and Paul and I kind of contemplated this time last year with our AI and Journalism Futures project, a scenario planning project. We called it Machines in the Middle. Like how realistic is that? Like how to what extent could AI fully automate journalism, and what would some of the outcomes be for that? What would we lose? What would we gain?
I think I can take some of that. So, I'm inclined to take Musk seriously, but not always literally. Some of the actions he's taken with X diminish its value as part of this new news media ecosystem, like penalizing external links and to platforms that lots of journalists use, and non-professional journalists included, like Substack and so on. But I think there is a coming transformation that he's pointing towards. Whether the extent to which X is part of that or not is an open question. And it requires a reconceptualization of what the function of journalism is. There was a UN representative yesterday who said journalism is a function, not a profession. And so if you stop thinking of journalism as a thing that J school, capital J journalists do, and says a function, AI allows it to look quite different in a sense of concentric circles of news creation and distribution. So like the broadest is a large circle of people who are not journalists at all, but who have insight, information, and expertise that bubbles up, mediated by AI through social media platforms. Stuff that you just wouldn't know, right? It's distributed knowledge and information. And then there's a smaller circle that includes professional journalists, but also non-professional journalists who have local expertise, specific industry knowledge, specific local knowledge that kind of curate that information, that amplify it. And then the top level is, I think, still a role for legacy news outlets and journalists to provide a kind of truth-validating function that's based on their deep well of reputation, reputational reservoir, if you will. And so you have this kind of concentric model of how AI will mediate a new information ecosystem. But that requires a reconceptualization of what the function of a journalist is. Like, it's not the old idea of the journalist as an explorer hacking their way through the jungle in deepest, darkest Africa, and then having a Dr. Livingstone, I presume, moment. And I mean all the negative connotations that come with that. If you know anything about the history of that history of journalism, that there are lots of negative exclusionary implications there. But it's a role of the journalist as the curator, surfing, looking for insight, news, and information that's bubbling up, and then adding a very valuable layer of validating, fact-checking, and truth-seeking on top of that.
Murielle, what's your response to that?
Yes, so 2 weeks ago, when XAI acquired X, then we have an answer here that the end of the value chain of information is no more just social media, it's AI. So that's the Musk vision. But what I would add is to what extent we are actually not just in a linear situation. Is AI actually being also the start of the value chain, and to what extent do we want this? And there is a lot of reflection, I think, to be maybe not really reflection, more action to be taken in what journalists think about this becoming a loop and not just this being a line. When I mean this, is just what are the actionables that you can put forward, that you can do in order to make this AI be more journalistic, meaning what is news? How can you influence the machine in what is news?
And I think building on that, one of the undercurrents in all of these discussions, here today and the other panels, is power and sort of the changes in who has power over the flow of information. And journalists and editors and publishers have had a lot of power over the flow of information, agenda setting and newsworthiness decisions and decisions about angles and all the rest of it. And that's obviously, when I think people get impassioned about these subjects, there's a little bit of that in there too. With this sort of vision of, of an AI crowdsourced form of journalism, is it realistic? Might this be a good thing? Is it realistic to think that we might be able to have a distribution of power or some kind of a form of journalism in which, although the infrastructure is maybe owned, the power over what what goes where is not. It's open source. It's transparent. Whatever it is. Is that possible? Is that a good thing? How would that work? You want to take that? Start with that, Shuwei?
Yeah, I guess just to add a bit of additional context to the question is this time last year when we were running a scenario planning exercise with 60 people from around the world, more than half of them journalists, this question came up a lot around the transfer of power. But what was missing from the discussion was really kind of, as a starting point, the power that human editors already have and what form that takes, whether that was centralized as a hangover from the sort of news industry of the last century and a half, and how that was shifting. So I think it's first, in order to examine the question, you have to understand the current power structures of the human construct of the news media industry and how that might be changing in order to look at the transference to the machine system.
Can I jump in with just to provide the historical analogy? It's, we can note the extent to which Elon Musk spent, $250 million on the Trump campaign. So his control over a platform that's doing a kind of journalistic function, the connection to power, political power in this case, is very real and something that we should definitely be keeping an eye on. But again, to Shuwei's point, that this is not necessarily a complete deviation from the past, right? So I'm thinking here of the Newspaper Preservation Act of 1970, where Richard Nixon, where the CEO of Hearst writes Richard Nixon and says, hey, we got your back, Dick, and you got ours, so scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. So they signed the Newspaper Preservation Act, creating an antitrust safe harbor that helps newspapers fight off competition from then the big bad boys were not social media, it was television news outlets. And in exchange, in 1972, 93% of op-ed pages backed Richard Nixon in the election under orders from a cartel of newspaper owners, right? It's the highest number ever recorded. They also put a squelch. It was a reason why someone who wasn't part of that agreement at the time, the relatively small Washington Post, they're the ones who uncovered Watergate, not because they were the first to the information, because they weren't part of that kind of corrupt bargain. So again, when you talk about people using these platforms, we have to grapple with the past ways in which news editors and news owners abuse that power as we're thinking about the potential abuses now and in the future.
But it's not necessarily a good outcome to move power from kind of one form of centralization to another. I mean, there are, I think the values, at least in the operation side of journalism, might be a little different than they are in other centers of power. But this idea, and maybe it's utopian idea, that we can have a journalism without centralized power that's nonetheless, valid journalism. Is that a pipe dream? Is AI possibly a path to that? Anybody who wants to pick that up?
Yeah, so AI is definitely something that is centralizing things technologically. So for me, if you are in a situation where you're just in a shift of power, if you think that the decision of what is news today or what is not news on Tuesday is a centralized situation, and you shift it from an editorial board to a tech company, it's always the same thing, right, from the point of view of your question. And what I would add, actually, is that this situation is even worse, not that you go algorithmic. Because you go algorithmic, then you centralize things anyway.
But is the tech company making those kind of decisions? And I'm especially thinking here about the possibility of new kinds of personal editors enabled through LLMs, where you get to set your own editorial perspective that delivers you your news. Is that a feasible thing? Just because the tech company owns the infrastructure, does that necessarily mean it has to have power over the editorial decision making?
Yeah, so I think it's a question of technological knowledge. To what extent journalists have actionables in order to influence what is AI for news? And for me, there are two technological actionables for journalists. The first one is take the trip to tech and understand. And this is just called epistemic counterpower. This is the fashionable way just to know it, understand it. And the second is building the gold standards. You're the one knowing what is the gold standard for news in every kind of thematic topic, be it fashion, politics, or what is the first fact to put in a paragraph. You know it. That's the level of detail we need in order to be able to have something that works well for news and works well for the people. And so I would say just go and contribute to assess these systems, create benchmarks that are the gold standard to say this is good news, this is poorly said, this is non-precise, or take, for example, adverbs. You know the impact of an adverb in a sentence. I mean, French has 2 places for adverbs, which makes it more complex, but English not. So, and this is for me really a strategy, an actionable.
So right down into the minutiae of language. I mean, that editorial decision is deep. And Shuwei, you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I guess another way to look at this question is really from a user needs perspective. I think one thing that I really noticed at this festival, as compared to other conferences and gatherings of other information-producing industries, is there's quite little emphasis on the audience and users' perspective, kind of a lot on the supply side, a little on the demand side. One question to ask is, you know, do these power shifts make a non-trivial difference to the end user and to society? And ask the question from there. I think Silicon Valley and technology is incredibly great at serving user needs. Journalism has this dance of serving user needs and societal needs. Maybe it's a question that we need to ask ourselves repeatedly.
And if we kind of drill down a little bit on this, like down to moderation, and this has been a big part of like what Musk has done at Twitter is sort of like get rid of all the moderators. And you know, behind that is this idea, this perspective, this ideology he has that you know, any speech that is not explicitly prohibited by law should be enabled speech. So this whole category of speech that's permitted by law but not permitted in the marketplace or in the town square, he dismisses that. And he has an alternative to moderation and fact-checking and verification called community notes, and this has become something that Meta have picked up and so on. Is that valid? Is community notes a useful way to sort of move Musk's form of journalism in a more journalistic direction?
I mean, if we can think of community notes as, you know, walking or crawling so that future live customizable content moderation systems can run, then yeah, I mean, I think it points in the right direction, even if it's insufficient on its own. So, I mean, a world in which there's no longer talking about the algorithm as this mystical magic black box that's run by a centralized, powerful, you know, platform node, but instead as, well, everyone has their own algorithm. And then also in a world where we're talking about the Fediverse and open source protocols, and where they're able to port quickly between platforms, reducing the power of any individual and the stickiness of any individual platform. So in a world like that, where you have tools that, I'm thinking here of Intel tried something called Bleep a couple of years ago that was live customizable audio moderation, and you could scale up the quantity essentially of offensive speech and define for yourself what the offensive speech is. And so you're not having to have one central moderating algorithm that says all speech that says this is prohibited, but every user can make that decision for themselves.
And that sounds a lot like this idea, you know, the AI playlist at Spotify, or this potential thing that X is building to let you be control your own editor.
Yes, yeah. So in theory, it's a world where X, qua X, has less control over that process and is less powerful in that process too.
Any other views there on community notes or moderation?
Yeah, so I would say that what is interesting about community notes, it's that it's not only people talking or making comments or kind of fact-checking, or there are two parts in community notes. People crowdsourcing, fact-checking, and the second one is the algorithm. And what the algorithm is doing is building consensus. So somehow if we take back the image of what is happening in an editorial board, we have this kind of collegiality where there is consensus of what is news and what is not. And now this kind of consensus building is out in the wild with people doing it. And that's the question of scale. Now that it's out in the wild, people doing it, you need an algorithm to build a consensus because it's too many points of view, too many things. And so for me, this recalls the question of trust, because we move from a kind of a model, or we're moving, it's not sure we move, but we're moving from a kind of a model where we trust the individual, the name of the person, the journalist, or the collegiality that is inside an editorial board, to a situation where we trust the mass or the audience. So there is something in this shift that is a huge power shift, but requires an algorithm to be powered. It requires this at-scale situation where you build a consensus like this. And it seems to me that it's a huge challenge for journalists, but it's also a huge challenge for the audience. Is there a situation where I can trust somebody to decide what's the useful information for me today?
Well,
as I'm busy with kids or running Python or whatever.
That brings up, I think, one of the major counter arguments to what Elon Musk is doing at X, which this has been very impactful to me. This argument that Yuval Noah Harari makes in his book Nexus, his history of information networks, and his argument there is that it's not just more information that makes society empowered by information. What it is are these self-correcting, truth-seeking mechanisms. And the big one that he points to is the scientific method, but journalism is one of those, government intelligence is one of those, body of common law is one of those. These are both truth-seeking and also self-correcting. What is that in an AI, in a machines in the middle kind of AI-mediated information ecosystem? What moves us? What bends the arc towards truth, and does so in a way that self-corrects even when flawed humans are involved? Yeah.
I think a hopeful note here is that I still think, an important role for humans to play and for professional journalists, at least in the near to medium term, which is that people don't trust AI right now, and so relatively low levels of trust. So when AI-mediated discovery mechanism, news and information is bubbling up, people still put a value. There is a value for someone to provide the truth-seeking function that was once provided by newsrooms. Of course, newsrooms combined knowledge discovery, news discovery and creation with truth validating function. Those two functions were combined in the traditional newsroom. They're being pulled apart, disaggregated. But that second function can't be done by AI. So you want people, even now, people have folks they trust to deliver reliable news and information, and they place a value on that, which is why there's a new news media ecosystem of independent journalists, whether that's, yesterday we heard from Taylor Lorenz and Johnny Harris, or V. Spear, or you go down the list. These are people who have built trust, and so people trust their opinion when it comes to what is newsworthy, all the news that's fit to broadcast in this case. That's a function humans still can play, and I think legacy news outlets have a reservoir of trust. So if they move away from thinking, AI can provide the news discovery function, the remaining role, the remaining function, I think still can't be done by AI, is that truth validating thing that people still demand.
Go ahead, Murielle.
Yeah, just a small addenda on the consensus building through an algorithm, which is a kind of a proxy of truth, right? It's mass augmented proxy of truth. What about non-consensual truth? I mean, what is experience in this situation, like individual experience in this situation? So there is something about truth that is not always linked to scale. And so this is something that is structurally difficult to represent when you are in an algorithmic situation, right?
Would it be fair to say that, to paraphrase that truth is deterministic and not probabilistic? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's a nice expression. I think I need a lot of more philosophy in order to answer this question, so.
I don't think we have time for that. Just before we go to questions, I'm going to just, maybe we can wrap up here very, very quickly by looking a little bit to the future and through the eyes of audiences, ordinary people, individual citizens. And so, us, individual citizens in 2025, we clearly have vastly more access to information than a citizen in 1825 or in 1625. We know vastly more about our world and vastly quicker and all the rest of it. Given the possibilities of AI and sort of this emerging AI-mediated information ecosystem, what might a citizen in 2055 or 2075, what might they be able to access in terms of information?
Well, you can imagine, if we're automating forms of intelligence right now, then yeah, there could be, not only will we be accessing a network of however many human beings there are gathering news and information and filtering up through an AI-mediated process, but AI news gathering agents themselves. So you can imagine, think of how we went from gathering weather data, for example. You went from, to figure out what the weather is going to be, you went outside and put your finger in the air and said, I think it's going to, that's your weather gathering data. Relying on, we're lacking expertise when everyone's having to do it that way. Then we have weather stations, which are manned by people at some point, and you send your report off to the central body, and then they make predictions about the seasonal weather, which is an improvement, but not by much. But then we have automated systems, mechanically automated, that send data itself. But now imagine a network where you have AI-powered weather monitoring stations that are making very minute calculations, like the improved level of news and information on weather data.
But Paul, how would that look for politics?
How would it look for politics? Yeah, well.
What's the equivalent of fast, automated, accurate weather for politics?
Yeah, I mean, do our AIs have the right to vote in this scenario? I'm not sure what the...
Shuwei, what do you think?
40 years from now, I think, the marginal value of more information is decreasing. So I'd like to think that and I don't know what this might look like, but in 40 years from now, we will have more understanding as well as more knowledge.
Murielle?
So I think about a Chinese poem about climbing a mountain and seeing stages and stages of the world much more, and this equates to being aware and understanding. So there is this equation of augmented information, augmented man, and scale information, scale humanity, these kind of things. So I'm still thinking about what is essential, and it's true that this amount of information could equate to this mountain, so that you see more and more the view and you understand things at scale. But to what extent experience is in the valley? To what extent we will manage to have both the at-scale view of the world and the life in the valley? And this is a challenge I think we all need to start now thinking about.
Okay, we have about a little less than 10 minutes left, and we wanted to save lots and lots of time for questions. I see some hands going up already, and we have a microphone that's going to go around. So just on the questions, ask whatever you want, but please make it brief. Be specific and kind of cognizant of the time. We don't really want the kind of long, more of a comment kind of stuff going on. But with that, please, and also if you could direct, who are you asking the question of, who on the panel? If you could, so we got to select somebody. Shall we start with Charlie, and then we can maybe move around to Nick and.
Yeah, thanks, David. Charlie Beckett, London School of Economics. This is by far the best session I've been to at this conference, obviously apart from the one I chaired yesterday. But absolutely fascinating, a great wake-up call. I'm just curious, though, about the way that you're still using that T word, truth, you know. And also, I was fascinated by the idea. I loved your last phrase about knowledge and understanding. Knowledge is marginal, understanding is critical.
Judea Pearl, not mine.
Okay, yeah, indeed. Well, none of us are original. But I also then thought, well, what about the emotional piece? You know, the idea that somehow, I don't know, politics or power is rational and evidence-based and informational. It's just not true, as we all know. We all know that we are emotional, we are about ideas and identity and so on. And AI does really struggle with that, you know, and that I'm not trying to make some defensive case for journalism at all, because I think journalism is actually quite terrible at emotions as well sometimes. But do you agree that I'd love to know your thoughts on AI in an irrational human world? What are the kind of limitations? Thank you.
So as we are in a Musk panel, I will answer with the fact that neuronews is coming, right? And that's definitely having, like, I saw somebody that has this kind of things to listen to music like here, so that if you add the information about emotion from electrophysiology recorded on your brain in an AirPod situation, then you get the picture of emotion too.
I'll just quickly add to that. You know, my experience with LLMs is they're really good with emotion. I've never done therapy before until Claude came along. So there we go. So maybe Nick is next here, and then we'll go to the other side of the room.
Hi, Nick Newman from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. I would just endorse what Charlie said. Absolutely fantastic panel. I'm interested in the question of audiences and the impact that some of the things you're talking about, and whether some of the things from our research anyway, audiences are really going to lean into, such as more relevance, but they're also very slow-moving and very traditional and very different in different parts of the world. And so I'm kind of interested in what your thoughts are about how audiences react and the difference that's going to make to the speed of adoption.
Who wants to take that? I can maybe have a little go with that. You know, I think one of the surprises, I think, about generative AI that's happened is the speed of the adoption, right? I mean, the numbers that we're seeing in multiple ways, not just sort of use, but sort of like hundreds of millions of people, obviously, how often they're using the tools. There's been recent studies about the proportion of text in our environment that's coming from generative AI, and it's already in double digits. So I think there's a lot of that going on. And I think, for me anyways, the answer here is this, I think it's Neil Stephenson's, I might be wrong, some science fiction writer, about how the future's already here, it's distributed. And I personally see this all over the place with AI, where you have some people that are 20 years ahead. Like I cannot comprehend what they're doing with this stuff, and I'm really immersed in this. And then there are other people that just, it isn't relevant to their lives and is not likely to be for a very long time. And to me, I think that's the way to think about it, is we're going to move into this world where not everybody is in the same place. We have radically different experiences of information and technology by different populations. That's my own interpretation. Any other ideas on that?
Well, not all of us are, early adopters and using it for therapy already, like you did. That's right. I don't think, I've been watching the emerging research literature on adoption, right? So there's a disagreement over whether the primary benefits of LLMs are for like the lowest distribution on skill and expertise, whether it brings up the bottom quartile up towards the median, or whether they're primarily beneficial for the higher end of the distribution, and it helps, essentially superpowers their ability to achieve at the cutting edge at the top 10% or 1%.
I'm going to call it there because I want to get two more questions in. One here, and then Felix, and then I think that's going to be all we're going to have time for. I can't, is there any other hands? I don't see any other hands at all.
Thank you. All right, just to echo the previous comments, this was very intellectually interesting. I really appreciate taking an objective view of Elon's sort of contrarian points of view. He's been very successful at taking that type of approach and bringing it into the mainstream. So objectivity, let's put that aside. Let's not be objective for a second. He is a threat. He does not like this industry. He's been very vocal about that. But he's making a huge amount of money off of the industry's openness to their content going into his systems. You know, XAI, they're web fetching millions of articles every week for engagement and conversations, and now he's effectively fused that into XAI. Why should the media industry take this type of passive posture and see this type of scraping happen en masse? And what are the options to push back at it?
So just a couple things. They shouldn't, if you make something that is expensive and difficult to make, you should get paid for it. But nobody's making money out of generative AI. Like, honestly, like, nobody's making money out of generative AI. No, I get that, and you know, they all have investments with the expectation of making a huge amount of money, but you know, we may not see those investments realized. But I absolutely get the point on you know, copyright regimes are not fit for purpose in this new environment. There's a whole paradigm shift that I think we need to go through about how do we incent the development and collection and processing of hard and expensive and difficult information, which you know is going to be an increasing role for legacy media, I think, as the more routine stuff gets automated out. So, and just lastly, Felix, and I apologize to anyone whose question that we haven't been able to get to, but quickly, Felix, if you could. We don't have time? Oh, okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Sorry for running out of time there a little bit, and we can have a chat after the